Before purchasing a camera, one should have a thorough understanding and an in-depth knowledge of the machine. After studying all the controls of the camera, one should become familiar with all its operations. Naturally, it is very important to study the camera manual and must try to become familiar with all the operations and obtain guidance from the right person. Thus, it is essential to learn to use the camera properly. As a starting point, we must study the manual of camera itself thoroughly. Without studying it a few times, it is difficult to get deep understanding of both the manual and the camera. When I purchased a camera, I read the manual many times and learned from the manual about the camera's buttons, dials, and its functions and their use. My camera has a unique function called catch-in focus. Only after several years, I came to know about this function. Any lens that can be attached to my camera using the appropriate adapter. However, I came to know this feature only 2-3 years after I bought the camera. Clearly an indication that I had not read the manual properly, thus had not understood the camera sufficiently. One needs to know in depth the facilities and the features the camera has to offer. The next thing is to study the basic operations of camera. Think practically and work methodically. When doing photography, one must give it their 100%. High quality work of art can only be created by taking photographs with both body and mind. In photography, theory and practical both are equally important. And besides, it is very important for us to use the experience of others and combine that with our own experience. One can deepen their knowledge by a combination of the theory and making use of our experience. I call this as working methodically. If you work in such a traditional or methodical way, you can achieve better results and quick success in photography. It is important to know the basics of photography. We learn these basics by studying books, by self-experience, and learning from experienced photographers. After knowing the basics of photography, the next important thing is the equipment we use, that is, the camera and its accessories. We can consider the accessories in a later slide or lecture. Your camera is a photographing machine. Perfect and accurate knowledge of its mechanisms is essential. We must learn all the mechanisms perfectly. There are 8 mechanisms in the camera. The first mechanism is the diaphragm mechanism. A diaphragm is a disc of thin metal sheets attached to a circular ring. It is a kind of membrane made up of different thin metallic petals. When the petals are closest, a very small hole is created in between and it is called aperture. When these petals are close together, size of the hole created by the petals is very small. And when these petals begin to move further apart, the size of the hole becomes larger. By rotating the diaphragm ring, the size and hence the area of the aperture can be made smaller or larger. We should learn how to use aperture effectively in photography. By making the size of aperture smaller or larger, the intensity of light entering the camera through the lens and aperture can be decreased or increased. Using a proper aperture, lens aberrations can be minimized and naturally the quality of image as well as sharpness gets improved. This means that some defects in the lens can be reduced. Second mechanism is the camera shutter. We need to understand what shutter is and the purpose of it. You don't need to learn actually how the shutter works, but knowing where and how you use the shutter is very important. By increasing or decreasing the shutter speed, you can control the blurring that occurs in the photo due to quick movements of objects in the foreground, as well as blurring of an image due to the handshake or a camera movement. The third important mechanism is focusing mechanism. From manual focus to autofocus, there are different types of focusing mechanisms. With the help of aperture, shutter, and the sensitivity of sensor within the camera performs something that is known as metering. This results in the camera selecting an aperture which is the right combination of the intensity of light entering the aperture and the duration for which it lets the light in. It is therefore very essential that different metering patterns be used for different types of photography. In a camera, different types of exposure modes are provided. Exposure refers to the combination of intensity of light entering the camera, the length of time the light enters into the camera, and the ISO to produce a good quality image. The image formed on the sensor is saved. Only if one understands how the exposure modes work, then one can choose the correct exposure mode and decide the changes we need to make. While adjusting the exposure settings based on the brightness of the object to be photographed, naturally, the exposure mode used is very important. The sensitivity of the sensor is always measured in ISO. Many of us have used film cameras few decades ago. The film was sensitive to light and the sensitivity of film was measured in ISO. Incidentally, the sensitivity of the film could never be changed by the user. Therefore, films with different sensitivities were made available at the time. Now, we are using digital camera. The sensor of a digital camera also has a sensitivity, and since its sensitivity is compared with the sensitivity of film, the sensitivity of a digital camera is also measured as ISO. But we must understand that the sensitivity of a digital sensor never changes. It would help to understand what actually happens when we use higher ISO or lower ISO. Similarly, it would be useful if we understand white balance, color temperature, and if there is any difference between these two. Do the camera have any controls for color temperature? How to set white balance, and most importantly, the histogram, which allows us to decide the accurate exposure. If the exposure is improper, we can look at the histogram, change the exposure, and retake the photo. These are 8 mechanisms that a photographer should understand properly. Photography is considered a form of art. For photography, we have to study the art, the skill, and along with it, the science. Aristotle has said the aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. Therefore, the emotions created by the scene should be conveyed through the photo. For a photographer, when he desires to portray in the photo, what is suggested by the photo itself is more important. If it depicts a landscape or if it is a portrait of a person, the picture by itself could be an excellent one. However, the art lies in the feelings and thoughts brought forth by the picture and in engaging the viewer's attention to the picture. What is suggested by the photo is of utmost importance. As a photographer, if you are able to combine knowledge, art, skill, and practice into your photography, your composition will not seem mechanical. Every art has a unique tradition. If we try to cultivate that art with the help of this tradition, the art doesn't get destroyed. Art without tradition is a flock of sheep without a shepherd. to drive a flock of sheep and to keep it under control. The shepherd, along with his dogs, protect the flock and guide the flock in the right direction. Similarly, in photography, the tradition serves as well to protect our art. Knowledge can be acquired through study. Art is innate. If knowledge and art are combined and consistent, skill is born in us. In order for this to happen, we must practice a lot. Sadhana means repeating the same thing n number of times. Doing same work for years is called sadhana in Sanskrit and in Marathi. We say in English, practice makes perfection. The same applies in the field of photography. Needless to say, our photography becomes excellent. There should be constant innovation in art. If there is no innovation, the art is dead. Elements of composition. To compose using all tools is our main goal, and all forms of art and skill lead to composition. So, let us now take a look at the elements essential for composition as well as painting. In order to compose the scene in front of us into a given frame, we need to arrange subjects in an attractive way. While arranging the subjects, many factors and elements that are available could assist us in it. Let us consider some of the principal elements known as elements of composition. Among the main elements of composition, simplicity is at foremost. Simply states a photo should be very simple. That is, it should not be a mess of many things. If many objects are included in a photo, it would lack simplicity and therefore not attract viewers' attention, nor would it be appealing to the eye. The next element is principal subject, which should be the center of interest. We must study the properties of principal subject. It is important that it catches the eye of the viewer instantly and should be more attractive than other subjects in the vicinity. This way, the viewer's eyes are always attracted towards the center of interest. The placement of the principal subject in the frame is also very important, and in order to determine its position, to determine its size, the photographer must choose a good viewpoint. The size and shape of the principal subject should be different and more attractive than other subjects around it. In the photo, indicative lines may be used to show different expressions. The lighting arrangement, whether natural or artificial, has its own significance. Specific direction of light enables us to see texture on the surface of an object. Such texture is important in the elements of composition. Due to the light incident from different directions, different types of tones, that is shades, are produced on the object. These different shades can give your photo or a certain object a sense of three dimensions, which we can call depth or 3D. It is very important that in the photo, the focus of the viewer stays on the main part of the photo. In order to retain viewer's eye, in the photographs area, we need framing, that is placing the photo in the frame. This framing should not be mistaken as a photo frame that we buy or get done in a store. We should be able to achieve this framing using natural subjects available. Foreground and background are two very important elements in binding a photo together. If we can get a good foreground in the photo, we can create a sense of depth. Further, the photo can be made effective by choosing an appropriate background, which should not be busy or casual. If it is a nature picture, it is important to create the impression of three dimensions and show grandeur.